These coasters literally aren't worth it. Not in the financial sense or the time sense. They took me about 6 days to make, and if I tried to sell them, I'd probably make less than minimum wage. But here's the thing. I had these leftover scraps from the floating shelf project, and instead of doing the sensible thing, like throwing them out, I decided to design a set of coasters with continuous grain, spline joinery, and grain wrapped matching boxes. So, yeah, 6 days for coasters that no one even asked for. And honestly, I regret nothing. Anyway, this is the coaster build. Now, I'm not saying that they aren't beautiful or that people wouldn't enjoy seeing them on their table, but small handcrafted pieces like this simply aren't worth the time and the material that go into them. So why make them? Well, I did have some leftover walnut, and I have an inability to let good wood go to waste. But mainly, it's for the same reason you're still watching a video about coasters. Because somewhere deep down, you're just like me. We love the process. Even when the outcome is, just a coaster. For this project, I had a few main goals besides just using up scrap. I wanted a cohesive set, something that had continuous grain and could match up the coasters like a little puzzle on the table. And I wanted a box that also had continuous grain around the outside. The box needed to look somewhat sleek on the table, low profile, and I wanted a hole that makes grabbing the coasters easier. That's the goal anyway. So here I'm making a template that I'll use with a router and a guide bushing to cut a repeating pattern into this chunk of walnut that will eventually become the coasters. So the trick with this technique is that the strips you inlay have to be exactly the same size as the material that you remove with the router. If they aren't, the pattern won't line up, and instead of a clean intersect, you kind of get this offset effect that looks like you free-handed it after 3 coffees. So I start by taking a shallow pass with the router to remove just a bit of material. And then I make a cut on the bandsaw, being sure to color in between the lines. Then I use a pattern bit to bring the whole channel to the same width as the initial router pass. The pieces you saw me milling up at the beginning of the video, they'll become the sides and the bottoms for the box that holds the coasters. Then I use a flush cut bit to take off the remainder. Each of these pieces are about 2 inches thick, so I think if I resaw them, I might be able to squeeze out 4 sets out of this one board, which would be perfect, because then 4 people get coasters who never even wanted them in the first place. The maple strips need to match the groove width, so I resaw some bird's eye maple on the bandsaw. This project had a lot of resawing, because the pieces are 2 inches thick, the coasters, the sides, and the box bottoms all need to be cut into 4 pieces. This bow feather guide helped a lot for this, and I bought it just for this. Then I stick them to a sled and run them through the planer to get rid of the blade marks and bring them to the final size. Ideally I'd use a drum sander for this, but I don't have one, so it took a little extra time, but it worked fine. Then it's time to inlay the maple into the sine wave shaped groove. Basically, I'm sandwiching the maple strip between the 2 walnut halves, clamping it into the shape of the cut. I love being in the shop, and I wouldn't call it stressful, but there's always that tiny burst of panic the moment glue hits wood. I've had some pretty chaotic glue-ups in the past, clamps everywhere, glue running, rags flying, me questioning my life choices. Thankfully, this one actually behaved. After gluing it up, you basically just repeat this cycle. You route, cut, flush it up, glue it back together. That's partly why this project took so long. It's not that I'm slow. Well, maybe a little bit. But most of the time is waiting. You cut and glue, and then wait for the glue to cure before you can start the next pass again. The boxes, they're the same story, but more on that later. Little fun fact for you. Did you know coasters actually got their name because back in the 1800s they had wheels? You could literally coast wine across the table to your buddies without getting up. How incredible is that? It's pure innovation. Peak laziness. Not really sure why we got away from that, but it sounds pretty awesome. But it must have been a hell of a party when they took those wheels off for good, right? Woke up, said no more. Probably after too many freak Bordeaux accidents. Maybe it's one of those ideas that's really great early in the night, but then after everybody's had a few glasses, they start forgetting there's a Merlot missile inbound. They're turned around telling a story, this thing comes rolling in hot, and boom, vintage 1832 meets hardwood floor. It's a disaster. I think we lost something special that day though. Maybe in a future project we'll make one with wheels, but I think we'll just keep these ones of the stationary variety for now. So here you're seeing me resaw the pieces that will make up the box. I make passes roughly 1/4 of the width of this chunk so that I get 4 slices out of each piece. Between passes on the bandsaw, I clean it up, squaring off the rough cut on the planer, and then resaw another piece. I repeat this process for the box bottoms. I left these ones a little long so they could still be passed through the planer. At the end, I dimension all 4 to the same thickness. I sand all the box pieces since sanding the inside of the box after glue up is pretty much impossible. Next, I need to resaw the maple inlay block into 4 planks, 1 for each coaster set. I follow the same routine as before. You clean up the uneven side from the glue up, then head to the bandsaw and take off about 1/4 of the chunk. After each cut, I run the piece through the planer to remove blade marks and flatten it again. You've probably noticed by now, but I'm doing a voiceover. A few people commented on the last videos about the music and the lack of narration, so here we are. Some woodworking channels are all music and sawdust, others talk the whole way through, and somehow, both styles manage to get praise and criticism. So maybe it's actually impossible to please everyone. But I always wanted to do voiceovers. But after my dad passed away, I just didn't have the capacity for the first few videos. And honestly, starting a channel already had enough moving parts. Plus, my wife said, "Yeah, you should do voiceovers, you love to talk." Which I quickly realized was not the compliment I was expecting would follow. You can see some very small gaps on one of the pieces there. So I packed the gap with walnut dust from the sander, and I flood it with thin CA glue, and sand it back, and you can't even tell where they were anymore. Speaking of planned pieces, I've got a sideboard build coming up that I'm really excited about. It's made from solid Bastogne. It's got a dovetailed case, the Wenge butterfly keys, a bunch of half lap and through mortise joinery. So if that all sounds interesting, this is the part where I genuinely suggest that you subscribe. No pressure, but according to my analytics, 99% of you haven't anyways, so statistically you're probably in that group. This is where they finally start to actually look like coasters. I jointed one edge with the track saw there, and then rip each strip the width on the table saw. and I'm using this crosscut sled with a stop block set to that same width. From there, I cut 6 squares from each plank and keep every set separate. From this point on, I'm very careful to keep each set separate and in order so that the grain and the maple inlays stay aligned within each set. Because if I did all this work just to end up with a chaotic mix of random coasters in each set, I'm really not sure I'd emotionally recover from that. Here I use the router to cut a rabbet along the bottom edge of the box sides so the bottom panel can sit in flush. Then I stack 6 of the coasters, take a relative measurement, and set the whole table saw to rip the box sides to the exact height they need to be so the coasters and the sides are flush when all 6 are stored. It's one of those tiny details nobody will ever notice, but absolutely would if it was off. For the length of the sides, I take the width of one coaster at the thickness of both sidewalls and then throw in a few playing cards for a little bit of clearance. Enough room to make the coasters easy to grab, but not so much that they rattle around in there too much. Once the pieces are cut to length, I use a sled and miter the edges, lining up the blade right with the edge of the previous cut so the corners come together tight and clean with that continuous grain. Next, I trace the pattern for the box fronts from my initial sketch, and I'll cut it out on the bandsaw. But the first cut is straight, so I did on the crosscut sled. The angle I basically just eyeballed to where I thought it looked good. And if you did already subscribe, or you're going to, I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. This whole thing has been pretty humbling so far. The support, the people actually taking the time to watch, the comments, it really does mean more than you probably realize. And all of that is what makes the channel grow as well. And honestly, the comments on the last videos, they really meant a lot to me. I tried to respond to everyone, so if I missed you, just let me know. They were all incredibly kind and genuinely motivating, so thank you. I took a relative measurement here and I sneak up on the cut so that the bottoms fit perfectly inside the rabbet. Here I use a thin rip jig set to the width of my blade and cut strips of maple for splines for the box corners. I could have just left the boxes as they were at this point, but I thought some contrasting splines would subtly reflect the design aesthetic of the coasters and bring the pieces together, making it all feel a bit more cohesive. Plus, it also let each box stand apart with its own identity. I did 4 different designs here, one with 3 straight horizontal splines, one with a simple X, one with 2 X's set at 30 degrees, and one kind of chevron-inspired shape. The center spline is straight and the other 2 angled inward at 30 degrees. For the boxes with X-shaped splines, it's a 2-step process. The first spline gets glued in, then sanded flush, then I can make the second cut and repeat it again for the other side of the shape. Once all 4 boxes are splined, I carefully trim the excess on the bandsaw and then sand everything down flush. I add a chamfer around the top of the boxes and another on the underside of the coasters. Just enough to lift them visually, give them a subtle sense of elevation off the table. Then I clean the coasters and I apply my classic Rubio finish regime. do 2 coats of Rubio, scuff sanding between coats, then I apply Rubio Sheen Plus, which dramatically changes the depth and the color. I show this process in more detail in the credenza video and the floating shelf video if you want to see more on that. If glue-ups are the most stressful part of a build, finishing is definitely the most relaxing. I finish with a ceramic coat that protects against UV, fingerprints, and makes them hydrophobic as well. Earlier I said these coasters weren't worth it. Might have been a bit dramatic, but it was true. Financially at least. But in reality, they absolutely were worth it. Not because I planned on selling them, I didn't. And not because there's some high-end product that's going to change people's lives. They were worth it because I love the craft, and I loved making them. I love coming out to the shop, putting on some music, and getting lost in a project that has no real reason to exist other than the fact that I wanted to make it. I wanted it to exist. I think that's what's so special about small pieces. You can see and feel the labor of love in them. The little decisions, the extra care, the time nobody asked you to spend. It all shows up in the final product. And something like a coaster, it will get more attention than you'd expect as well. That subtle presence lying under conversation with friends and family, quietly showing its beauty. A quiet presence people will notice. And honestly, that's the kind of worth it I care about most. Even if they might just be a little too nice to be a coaster.